Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the hints from across government that the road to fixing public sector pay is about to begin very soon, including from Rachel Reeves, who said public sector workers are valuable and there's a cost to not settling public sector pay. But economists say that above inflation pay rises in the public sector, which are needed if we're to reverse over a decade of real terms cuts to public sector pay, would require more money in the pot. That would mean, realistically, tax rises, because we know the government aren't going to borrow for it. So really it comes down to this. Will the government raise taxes to pay for public sector pay awards to get back on track? I would say there's a lot of reasons to say absolutely yes. First of all, the Tories actually made the task easier. That was kind of them. Economists have made clear that whoever won the election was going to have to put taxes up. Alongside that message in the news, the Conservatives seem to spend about 95% of the entire election campaign bandwidth saying Labour are going to put your taxes up. They were making up all sorts of weird and wonderful taxes that Labour were going to put up. And people voted for them anyway, so the Conservatives have unwittingly prepared the public for Labour to put taxes up. It'll be like, it'll happen, and then the Tories say, we told you they'd put taxes up, and the public would go, yeah, we know, we still voted for them. But on top of that, it's not even an anguished expectation of tax rises. Polling has shown for a long time that the public want the government to deal with public services, even if taxes have to go up to do it. So after the spending review, when Rachel Reeves presents her budget statement, if she links any tax rises to public sector pay awards, the Tories will howl, but the public will approve. For a start, there are a lot of public sector workers. That's like 6 million people alone. If all sectors start to benefit, and for those who don't work in the public sector, they understand that better pay helps plug staffing shortages. And everyone knows that staffing shortages are a major issue in healthcare and education, at least. But what about Labour's promises not to raise taxes? They can't afford to look like... They can't make a promise in an election, then look like they've screwed voters over. The media will go mad, right? Well, Labour didn't promise not to raise taxes. In fact, their 6 First Steps card, which they were heavily promoting just before Sunak called the election, includes several key tax rises. Labour have been promoting the idea of tax rises, in a sense, and cagier about a few others. They promised not to raise taxes for working people. That's what they said. And they defined working people as those on lower to middle incomes. They've also said they would not increase income tax, national insurance or VAT. So they've ruled out certain specific ones. Lots of taxes they can raise, which don't increase the burden for those on low to moderate incomes. Capital gains tax gets a lot of attention and was getting a lot of attention during the campaign. Labour said they didn't need to increase capital gains tax to pay for their manifesto promises. But their manifesto promises don't say anything about public sector pay. And they have said that they want to deliver what's more than is in their manifesto anyway. And they've never said they won't raise capital gains tax, only to very carefully explain that they didn't need to in order to deliver their manifesto promises. Well, it will be a very handy way of delivering a boost to public sector pay. And the news is now reporting that pay review bodies are recommending increases of 5.5% for teachers and some NHS workers. When you consider that inflation is now at the target of 2%, that would be a significant boost and a good start when Labour not only want to avoid the public sector strikes that the Tories enabled, but actively recruit more workers into these sectors. And how would it look for a new Labour government to ignore the pay review bodies and impose a smaller pay increase? This is not going to occur. That wouldn't be great for industrial relations or a recruitment strategy that Labour have said begins right away. And the other thing to point out is Rachel Reeves this morning. I'm not sure I would quite go as far as use the word hype, but she is with a smile actively saying, we're going to sort this out. We're going to sort public sector pay out. And the last thing that is, she's laying the groundwork for that. The last thing she's intending to do is go, oh, this independent pay review body, which remember has been working along Conservative guidelines so far, is recommending 5.5%. Yeah, we're just going to give 2. Why would you hype that? I'll also point out that back in 1997, Labour weren't promising anything on public sector pay either then. That wasn't part of their campaign, wasn't in their manifesto. Yeah, I will tell you, as a teacher that started my career just after Labour won that election, the first 4 years, so the first Parliament, The starting salary for teachers increased by 26% over that 4 years. And when you take inflation into account, it was still a 20% real terms increase. Now, we may not get that this time because the economy is knackered in a way that it wasn't in 1997. But it's the Tories who crush public sector pay and it's Labour who boost it. And you don't need blind faith to believe that. Both behaviours are an inevitable consequence of how they each view the public sector. The Tories lower public sector pay because they want the public sector to collapse. They know they can only shrink the state so far openly. They come up with as many excuses as they can, but ultimately people object if you go too far, as they have done. So they undermine the rest by introducing inefficiencies and driving staff away with uncompetitive pay. Labour, on the other hand, are unashamedly in favour of a strong public sector, so the opposite thinking applies. They need staff. They know that a competitive salary is an essential component of that. And Labour's first 6 steps included, remember that their first 6 steps, this is the stuff they're saying we're going to do immediately. And it included requiring more staff in the NHS and more staff in state schools. So they've already promised to crack on with recruitment immediately. And pay is going to be part of that. That's how you attract people. And Labour are also laying the groundwork for this. Reeves is reported to be planning a public statement, a bit of a speech, about what they're calling their economic inheritance. I think it's at the end of the month. Labour have already pushed the idea the Tories have left the country in the worst economic mess since the Second World War. And remember, and again, that's an important link to draw, because what happened after the Second World War? A huge stimulus programme. It's laying the groundwork for tinkering isn't enough, we need to do something more serious. And it sounds like Reeves really wants to emphasise this point again and again. This time, when she can say she's got the full Treasury details in front of her. Expect lots of mentions of tough decisions, of course. You always get that with any budgetary statement from any politician of any party. But tough decisions will be along the lines of plugging holes in budgets, not making them. Some of them will be delaying fixes, of course, we know that. That's baked in. But it won't be a backwards budget statement, as we've been conditioned to expect from recent governments. The Tories are trying to say that they've left Labour with an economic recovery. But the latest figures show that the cost of service in our national debt was higher than expected by billions. In fact, just to throw something topical out there, the cost of borrowing in the first quarter of this year, so the actual cost of servicing the debt, just the extra cost alone was higher than expected by the same amount you would need to cancel the 2-child benefit cap. Reeves could use this to explain that the Tories are constantly underestimating the basic cost of managing public services because they don't value them. Incompetence combined with apathy. But however she chooses to do it, the reality is there are holes in public spending budgets all over. They need plugging. The public want them plugged. As the Financial Times points out, Reeves has got 3 choices. Borrowing is not realistically one of them. First, spending cuts. Nobody in Labour is laying the groundwork for that, for obvious reasons. That's not coming. Second, changing fiscal rules. Now, there's plenty in Labour want this to happen, and there's plenty of economists say that we should do that anyway, because the fiscal rules are not only bollocks, but the Tories were happy to change them as they saw fit. But Reeves did commit herself to them. Labour always have to go the extra mile on fiscal responsibility because the public don't believe it's in their nature. They believe that the Tories are the party of fiscal responsibility, but not Labour. It's the Tories' most successful lie. So the third option is tax rises of some kind. Now, these are not unpopular as long as it's the right tax rises, and Labour ministers have been laying the groundwork to prepare people for them. In fact, as I've already mentioned, so have the Tories. Very generous of them. One of the biggest criticisms from economists during the election campaign was nobody was really telling the truth about the economy, about tax and spend. Well, we may get a little more just before the summer recess. All of this is adding up to quite an interesting time. Don't expect Labour to fix everything with one economic state of affairs speech this month and then a budget statement later. Labour have been clear that some of their spending plans will come after economic growth has been achieved. But to get that growth in the first place, you have to do more than just appoint competent ministers. You can't just go, we've got grown-ups now, could you kindly invest in our country? You need to invest yourself. And public sector pay is one of the ticking time bombs that the Tories left behind, which will not wait. In terms of what they are calling the shit list, their list of things that have to be fixed really very quickly, they're about to explode. Public sector pay is one of them. And finally, we may get more. I mean, we might actually get more from the budget statement. I think I saw a figure of £10 billion needed to meet the above inflation public sector pay awards that are desperately needed. And we're going to need those for the long term, just as we got under the previous Labour government. So obviously an increase in tax revenues is going to be at least the initial part of the solution there. Growth can pay for them in the long term, but not in the short term. And if tax loopholes are going to be closed, which we know many are, and other taxes increased, such as capital gains tax, which we don't know, but Labour are hinting at, then what if they could raise something like, I don't know, £13 billion? Because that would be enough to get started on dealing with public sector pay and the single most effective way of dealing with child poverty. Not a magic bullet, but the single most efficient way of getting a start on it. And Labour have promised to tackle child poverty. Not that it would even need 13 billion. Because remember, when you give more money to people who don't have enough, they spend it. So some of that money goes back to the Treasury in the form of VAT anyway. And pay awards have some money coming back in the form of income tax and national insurance, as well as sales taxes. You know, you give £10 billion in tax cuts to the wealthy, it costs you £10 billion because the money just disappears. Give £10 billion to people who will immediately spend it because the month runs out before their money, or the money runs out before the month, sorry, get it right. And the Treasury gets an effective rebate on the spend. So paying for things like this never actually costs as much as the number on the balance sheet. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.